Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Rig, Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Previously in Season 1, a catastrophic tsunami swept across all coastal cities, catching humanity completely off guard and causing massive destruction. Yet no one could have imagined that the root cause of this natural disaster lay not in nature, but in humanity itself. On a remote offshore drilling platform in the North Sea, workers accidentally uncovered a species of primordial microorganisms dating back hundreds of millions of years. These organisms weren't just capable of communicating via telepathy, they also had the ability to convert crude oil into organic matter. Fearing potential losses to their oil company, the captain of the rig, Magnus, gave the order to inject toxic gas into the seabed in a bid to wipe them out. But this reckless act provoked a devastating retaliation. A massive underwater landslide followed, triggering an unprecedented tsunami. Fortunately, the oil company's emergency team arrived just in time, rescuing the platform's personnel before they could be dragged into the depths. But instead of heading back inland, the rescue helicopter flew them to another company-owned drilling platform, this one located in the Arctic. The moment they disembarked, everyone was forced into quarantine. Everyone except Coke, an investigator sent mid-mission from headquarters. Ironically, it was Coke who had insisted on launching the attack on the ancient organisms in the first place. As news broadcasts played images of tsunamis wreaking havoc around the globe, the drilling team turned their anger on him. Leading the outcry were Magnus and his deputy Rose, both of whom had advocated for peaceful coexistence with the creatures. Everyone blamed Coke's stubbornness for the catastrophe. Just then, the isolation room door opened. Coke entered, holding a contract in his hand. He told them that anyone who signed it could board the next flight out, plus receive a generous $200,000 severance package. While the others exchanged confused glances, Coke pulled Magnus and Rose aside for a private conversation. A VIP had just arrived at the base. It's Morgan, the company's CEO. She had come in person to explain everything. It turned out that this platform wasn't just a drilling site, it was also a massive mining operation. The company had planned to exit the oil business a decade ago and pivot to extracting minerals from the seabed. Beneath the glaciers lay an enormous mountain range, rich in mineral deposits unlike anything found on Earth. Just recently, a violent underwater quake had caused one of their survey teams to go missing. Rose, puzzled, asked what this had to do with her. Morgan invited her to the conference room and dropped an even bigger bombshell. The company had discovered the ancient microorganisms years ago and had been secretly studying them in labs. But the mineral samples they'd recovered from the seafloor were far more valuable, packed with rare elements. If they could build a full-scale mining operation, the company stood to become a global industry leader. Still, Rose, like most of her colleagues, wanted only to go home and expose the dangers posed by the primordial life forms. Morgan's expression hardened. She pointed out that the workers had signed confidentiality agreements barring them from disclosing any information about the microorganisms. Breaching the contract meant forfeiting all compensation. But then, her tone softened again. She wanted Rose and Magnus to stay on and lead the operation. If the company succeeded in extracting the minerals and rising to the top of the industry, Rose would be free to publish everything she knew about the ancient organisms. The board would even fund further research. After much hesitation, Rose agreed. Most of the other workers signed the non-disclosure contracts and prepared to leave. But a few, clear-eyed and morally resolute, refused to lie to journalists or government officials. They'd rather grow old and die at the base than help the company cover up its crimes. Thankfully, those workers soon received uplifting news. Magnus and Rose had officially been named the site's new leaders and would continue operations under new management. Not long after, the team descended via elevator to the platform's deepest level, where they discovered state-of-the-art deep-sea exploration gear. Their first mission was to rescue the missing survey team. Rose had already pieced things together. Hours earlier, the dive team had gone down to conduct a seafloor inspection, but an unexpected quake severed their umbilical cord, the lifeline that supplied power and oxygen. With only about an hour of backup oxygen left in the pod, the rescue team had to act immediately. Rose wasted no time. She assigned her most experienced navigator to lead the mission. The actual dive, however, had to be handled by Kyle, a local technician familiar with the terrain. The two of them quickly entered the submersible. Rose checked the countdown. Less than an hour remained. Without hesitation, she ordered the ballast tanks flooded, and seawater began rushing into the launch chamber. Before long, the base's hatch slowly opened, and the navigator piloted the submersible into the vast, silent depths of the ocean, soon vanishing from sight. Magnus felt a growing unease. He turned to the engineer, Fulmer, who had previously been infected by the primordial microorganisms and still maintained a strange, lingering connection to them. Fulmer shook his head, saying since they arrived here, that feeling has faded. Still, Magnus remained uneasy. This site was the first known location where the primordial microbes had appeared. Below them lay a labyrinthine mountain range. This could very well be the original nest of the ancient beings. Meanwhile, the navigator finally reached the incident site, following the navigation system. In the distance, they saw faint lights, and the radar confirmed the damaged submersible was just 200 meters ahead. But as they drew closer, it became clear the vehicle's glass dome had shattered, and its metal hull was crushed. The 2 crew members inside were already dead. Furious, Rose turned away abruptly, muttering that she'd inherited a complete mess. Thankfully, Magnus kept a level head and ordered the pilot to return immediately. But Coke, never one to leave well enough alone, insisted they recover the bodies and investigate the cause of the accident. Magnus didn't buy his sudden sense of responsibility and argued they should wait until they were better prepared. The argument escalated quickly. Kyle, growing impatient inside the submersible, finally snapped. Those 2 dead crewmen were his close colleagues. How could they just leave them there? The navigator, nodding in agreement, pretended there was a communication issue and rejected Magnus's recall order. He supported Kyle's decision to go out and retrieve the bodies. Magnus clenched his jaw as he watched the diver exit the vehicle. Soon, the feed from the accident site came through. Wreckage floated everywhere, but luckily both bodies were still inside the sub and hadn't drifted away. Coke suddenly interjected, reminding them not to forget the exploration log, clearly his real motive all along. With everyone watching, Kyle finally completed the grim task and returned to the submersible. The navigator greeted him and started the engines to head back. In the command room, a technician felt a sudden wave of unease. He rushed to the nearby lab and saw the primordial microbes reacting violently, as if triggered by something. Knowing how interconnected these organisms were, he sprinted back to the control room, shouting for the submersible to return at full speed. Unfortunately, his warning came too late. The navigator could already see a swarm of glowing microbes approaching. In seconds, the lights had completely surrounded the vehicle. Panic hit Kyle, who wanted to break through the formation, but the navigator stopped him. He had encountered these creatures before, and if he didn't threaten them, they wouldn't attack. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a loud pounding echoed from all sides of the sub. The navigator couldn't understand. Why were they so aggressive this time? With the pressure mounting, Rose ordered the umbilical cable activated to haul them up, but the sub wouldn't budge. It was as if it were glued to the seabed. Then came a sharp crack. The cable snapped. To make matters worse, the sub's windows began to crack under the immense pressure. Frozen with fear, neither Kyle nor the navigator dared move, terrified they'd suffer the same fate as the previous crew. Back in the control room, panic was setting in. With the umbilical severed, the trapped divers had only 2 hours of oxygen left. But there were only 2 submersibles in total, both now stranded on the ocean floor. No one could think of a way to mount a rescue. Thankfully, Kyle's experience came into play. He locked the navigator in the isolation chamber. If the glass shattered, he'd still have a slim chance of survival. Then Kyle activated the sonar. Since most marine life was highly sensitive to sound, he decided to take a gamble and cranked the signal strength to the maximum. It worked. The powerful sonar scattered the glowing microbes, and the signal was picked up in the control room, proof the 2 men were still alive. Magnus breathed a sigh of relief. Rose insisted they had to get them out, no matter what. That's when Coke had an idea. The platform had a built-in recovery function capable of winching submersibles back if it was directly overhead. But the surrounding sea was sealed off by thick ice. They'd need to blast open a path to move the platform into position. Though Coke no longer held command authority, no one argued. Rescuing the crew was more important. And truth be told, Coke still knew the platform's systems better than anyone. Magnus led Fulmer and a few others out of the chamber. They carried explosives and began cutting through the ice. At Coke's command, the massive platform began slowly descending. Soon, its entire base touched the ocean's surface, but forward movement was impossible. The ice was too thick. The rest was up to Magnus's team. They carved holes at regular intervals in the ice, placing charges into each one. Just as they were nearly done, a faint rumble echoed beneath the surface. Magnus's face darkened. It was likely the platform's weight causing the ice to crack. They were standing on a collapsing sheet that could give way at any moment, but there was no turning back. They had to finish placing the last of the explosives. Then the worst happened. One of the team members slipped and fell into a widening crevice in the ice. Magnus and Fulmer instantly dropped to their knees, crawling forward to pull him up. Just as they were about to haul him out, the detonator fell into the gap. Without hesitation, Magnus reached down and retrieved it, burning his skin in the freezing water. Frostbite quickly set in, but the mission was finally complete. Now, everything hinged on whether the platform's recovery system would work and whether they could pull their people back from the brink. On the vast, frozen expanse of the Arctic ice sheet, a series of deafening explosions shattered the silence. In just a matter of seconds, a water channel burst open through the millennia-old ice, blasted apart by controlled detonations. Out of the mist and steam, a man-made exploration platform, like a steel leviathan, began to glide through the water with mechanical precision. When it reached the precise location above the damaged submersible, a launch bay at the rear extended down toward the sea floor. With a deep metallic groan, the mangled sub was finally hauled back to the base. 2 bodies were removed, divers who hadn't made it out alive. Everyone stared at the sub's shattered glass dome with lingering dread. A few more seconds under attack from the primordial microbes, and they wouldn't have made it back at all. Coke, red-faced and trembling with rage, berated Rose for her naive idealism. He growled that those creatures didn't want peace. They wanted to wipe them out, and she still thought she could befriend them. As Coke stormed off, Magnus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. The primordial organisms they encountered earlier in the North Sea had been calm, even passive, until humans pushed too far. That's what triggered the violent retaliation. Now that Rose was in charge, she had access to all base records. Magnus urged her to dig deeper. He suspected the base was hiding something. Meanwhile, Kyle sat alone in the locker room, staring at an old photo pinned above his locker. Among the bodies recovered was his brother. Kyle shook his head and suddenly cursed Coke for his act. While the navigator's back was turned, Kyle quietly slipped the accident sub's log drive into his pocket. Just then, Magnus entered the locker room, intending to ask if Kyle had any other objectives during the dive. But Kyle, still bitter about being ordered to abort the body recovery earlier, shot Magnus a hard glare and brushed past him without a word. Elsewhere, Rose was hitting wall after wall in her investigation. Despite her high-level clearance, many key files had been buried or scrubbed. She suspected Coke was behind it, covering up something far darker. Outside, Magnus stood by a window, watching the aurora shimmer across the night sky. When he turned back, he caught sight of Coke hunched over a computer, acting suspicious. Magnus entered the control room under the guise of casual conversation, but when he looked at the monitor, the desktop was completely blank. Something clicked in Magnus's mind. He warned Coke to stop provoking the primordial life forms, but Coke remained defiant, saying every species that survived on this planet did so by taking what it needed. If humans want to stay at the top of the food chain, they have to do the same. Magnus disagreed, claiming if there's one thing humans excel at, it's orchestrating their own destruction. Coke still insisted on taking the offensive. Rose stepped in too, stating firmly that if they start a war with nature, it's humanity that'll be wiped out. Meanwhile, Morgan was flying inland with a group of employees who had signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Her mission was to contain the fallout from the primordial microbe incident and manage the narrative. By now, most coastal cities had been devastated by tsunamis. The surviving rescue teams and civilians had gathered in temporary camps. Dr. Kate looked around one such camp with a heavy heart. She had rushed back, hoping to reunite with her wife. But Morgan gave her the grim news. All roads into the city were sealed off, and the rescue operations had long since ended. If her wife was still alive, this camp was the only place she could be. Kate pulled out her phone in desperation. No answer, just endless ringing. As she turned to leave and began searching on foot, Morgan approached her with an offer, telling her to join the upcoming press conference. If she could stick to the script and not go off message, she would be granted full access to the camp. Kate, emotionally shattered and willing to do anything to find her wife, nodded without protest. Back at the Arctic base, Magnus was having his frostbitten hand examined by the medical team. The television played the company's press conference live. Morgan was in full spin mode, painting the corporation responsible for the disaster as the victim of it. Kate, now positioned as the heroic employee, recounted a heart-tugging tale of surviving a tsunami on the drilling platform and being saved by the company's timely intervention. Her words came straight from Morgan's prepared speech. Midway through, a journalist raised a question. The epicenter of the tsunami appeared to be near one of the company's exploration wells. Morgan dodged the question entirely. Watching the broadcast, Fulmer and the others were seething with anger. They'd expected this kind of cover-up, but that didn't make it any less infuriating. The bitterness in their hearts only continued to grow. But despite Kate's deeply conflicted speech, it didn't bring the outcome she had hoped for. True to her word, Morgan handed her a special access pass that allowed her to move freely throughout the camp. But once inside, Kate quickly realized how meaningless that privilege was. The place was packed to the brim with wounded survivors, and the staff were overwhelmed, racing from one emergency to the next. No one had time to care about the family member of an ordinary employee. They didn't even have enough hands to properly register the injured. Dr. Kate's heart sank. Frustrated and helpless, she stormed out of the tents and wandered to the edge of the compound, where she stumbled upon a fence plastered with missing person flyers. Only then did the true scale of the disaster hit her. The chances of finding her wife alive were practically zero. Veteran worker Hutton stood silently beside her, unsure how to offer comfort using his juicy tongue. All he could do was open his arms for a quiet, wordless hug. Back at the Arctic exploration base, a new clue had come to light. The submersible that had recently crashed had supposedly been sent to collect ore samples, but the crash site was well beyond the known mining zone. Clearly, the mission hadn't been as simple as it was made out to be. Rose, upon learning this, felt thoroughly deceived. She tried contacting Morgan to confirm her suspicions, but all her calls went unanswered. That's when she discovered the company had cut off all external communications. Frustrated and furious, Rose lashed out at her boyfriend, Fulmer. But Magnus, ever the seasoned strategist, took another route. If the top brass were hiding something, he figured it was time to go to the people who actually knew what was going on, the ones doing the real work. He soon came across the senior researcher being chewed out yet again during one of Coke's tirades. A data tech happened to witness the scene. When Coke finally left, the senior researcher, unable to hold it in any longer, opened up and told Magnus everything. After years of study, the senior researcher had discovered that the primordial microbes weren't isolated organisms, but part of a vast biological network running beneath the seafloor. They could share information and act in unison, functioning like a single living entity. The samples retrieved from the North Sea had been part of this same Arctic strain. Still, Fulmer couldn't figure out what the oil company was really doing here. The senior researcher hesitated, then revealed the truth. The company planned to expand operations across the Arctic Circle, but they feared that the microbes might ruin their investment, so they were preparing to wipe them out entirely. The poison they used in the North Sea had worked, but only on a small scale. Over the years, the company's deep-sea probes had been searching for the microbe's central node, the biological equivalent of a heart. If they could inject toxins directly into that node, the effect would spread through the entire network. The realization hit Rose like a freight train. The platform wasn't here to mine, it was hunting for the microbe's heart, and once again, she'd been used as a pawn. Fulmer connected the dots. The previous team that perished had likely been on the same mission. No wonder the microbes had lashed out. They weren't attacking, they were defending their home. But what no one noticed was that everything they said and did was being monitored by Coke and the communications officer, Bremner. Every word was caught on surveillance. Even with the truth now exposed, Coke and Bremner remained perfectly composed. Their focus had shifted to recovering the hard drive still in Diver Kyle's possession. That drive contained the exact coordinates of the primordial heart. That's why Coke had worked so hard to retrieve the damaged sub. What he hadn't counted on was Kyle keeping the drive for himself. After sneaking off to a maintenance room and viewing the contents, Kyle's resentment toward Coke only deepened. The bastard had known exactly how dangerous that dive was and had still ordered his team to press forward. Kyle's brother had died because of it. Meanwhile, the technician had cracked into a set of hidden files and uncovered something big. The Arctic platform was just phase 1. The company's ultimate goal was to claim full extraction rights for the entire Arctic Circle and to open it up to energy giants around the world. Rose didn't object to the ambition itself. It was the methods she feared. Would they use inhumane means to achieve their goal? Just like now, they were preparing to exterminate an entire life form, and yet there was no concrete evidence, no way to convince the world that these microbes even had value, let alone intelligence. And with communications locked down, they couldn't even call the authorities, much less alert the public. To Rose, the top priority was clear: stop Coke from finding the heart of the microbial network. If they provoked it again, another tsunami would be the least of their worries. While reviewing footage from the Explorer drone, Fulmer accidentally caught a brief cryptic audio segment. Curious, he clipped it and played it back, only for a sudden sharp pain to shoot through his head. He stood up but collapsed after just a few steps. The team rushed him to the medical bay, where he underwent a full examination, yet doctors found nothing wrong. The only explanation was that the mysterious audio frequency likely originated from the primordial microbes. Since Fulmer had once been infected, there might still be a lingering connection. The data analyst believed the microbes were trying to communicate with humans. When Rose heard this, she was thrilled. She had long advocated for opening a communication channel with the microbes, but first, they needed to understand what the microbes were trying to say. At that moment, the senior researcher was brought in. He had studied the primordial microbes for years, and after listening to the recording, confirmed that it indeed came from them. But when pressed about the message's content, the senior researcher grew unusually serious. He warned them not to try to interpret the thoughts of another species. Humans couldn't even fully understand each other. Though he said it with conviction, once the senior researcher returned to his quarters, he dove headfirst into analyzing the recording, working around the clock. He discovered that the two wave peaks were spaced very far apart, possibly designed that way so humans would have time to respond. The data analyst agreed and suggested the senior researcher speak with the navigator who had been present during the transmission. The senior researcher wrapped himself in a coat and headed down the corridor. But just as he was about to speak, his eyes locked onto something beyond the ice. Several blood-red spires jutting from the frozen surface like the outstretched hands of some ancient ice giant. He wondered if another prehistoric creature had awakened or if the microbes were retaliating again. The senior researcher speculated that the spires were likely formed by shifting ice sheets compressing together. As for why they were red, a closer investigation was needed. But Magnus immediately shut that down. A storm was coming. No one was to step onto the ice. The senior researcher was visibly anxious. The icebergs were drifting, and in a few days, no one would know where they'd gone. Rose suspected the red ice had something to do with the microbes and backed the idea of an immediate investigation. Magnus's expression darkened. Even if the team was willing to die for the cause, he couldn't let them throw their lives away needlessly. What he didn't expect was for the senior researcher to sneak out alone to the red icebergs while everyone else was distracted. As the blizzard intensified, Magnus turned to Rose with a cold glare before rushing to the equipment room to gear up for a rescue mission. To guard against any polar bears, Magnus brought along his two best marksmen. The trio sped out of the base, though visibility was near zero. They had to rely on a compass just to keep their bearings. Luckily, the senior researcher had left earlier and reached the red icebergs safely. He'd already pitched a tent and begun analyzing the samples. He speculated that the red material came from polluted seabeds, pushed up by the collapse of the previous drilling platform. But the moment the test results came back, everyone froze in shock. The red material wasn't natural at all. It was discarded ore waste from the exploration base. The company had claimed all waste was treated before disposal. Clearly, that had been a blatant lie. If more drilling platforms were built here, the entire Arctic Ocean would be contaminated. Now they had their answer. Magnus ordered everyone to prepare for immediate evacuation, but as they started the engine, they discovered the compass had mysteriously stopped working, and the vehicle's GPS was offline too. It looked like they'd have to find their way back through the blizzard, completely blind. Back at the base, Rose had made her way to the primordial lab. After being repeatedly called out by Magnus that day, she began to reflect on her actions. She'd been so focused on using Fulmer's infected status to establish contact with the primordial microbes that she'd completely overlooked the pain he was going through. It wasn't the first time this had caused friction between them. During one heated exchange, Fulmer had snapped, asking why she didn't get herself infected if she was so eager to bond with the microbes. Strangely, Rose found the idea oddly appealing. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but as she carefully sealed the nutrient chamber, she noticed something alarming. The primordial microbes inside had suddenly grown agitated. It was eerily similar to the attack on the exploration vehicle. A sinking feeling of dread crept into her chest. Meanwhile, in the command center, Fulmer was still helping guide Magnus and his team. Even with the base's beacon lights turned on, the team couldn't see a thing in the blizzard. Just then, Rose burst in, breathless, warning that the primordial microbes might be preparing to attack. But her warning came too late. Through the rearview mirror, Magnus caught a glimpse of a strange light glowing behind them. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, speeding forward blindly through the snow. But the microbes moved fast, so fast that the ice beneath them began to crack and shatter. Fortunately, the data analyst managed to spot a faint light coming from the base. Magnus steered toward it, but just as he was about to make the turn, the ice ahead suddenly erupted upward. He slammed the brakes, narrowly avoiding a deadly crash, but now their vehicle was completely surrounded by the glowing microbial forms. Just as panic set in, the senior researcher leapt from the vehicle with his laptop. With nothing left to lose, he decided to gamble everything on a hunch. He quickly loaded the recording of the mysterious microbial sound and played it through the headset, tossing the device into the ice. A deep, resonating hum spread beneath the surface. The sound had originated from the primordial microbes. Surely they would recognize it. To everyone's shock, the glowing forms began to disperse. The attack ceased almost instantly. The senior researcher stood there in disbelief, mouth agape for any smelly turds. His reckless move had actually worked. He had made contact with the microbes. Magnus and the others had narrowly escaped disaster, but peace was short-lived. Back at the base, a new crisis was unfolding. Communications Officer Bremner had cut off all external transmissions, emboldening Coke to act without restraint. After weeks of surveillance, they finally located diver Kyle's hiding spot. Bremner appeared behind him, intending to seize the hard drive containing the mission logs, but Kyle, a master of breath control, quickly slipped free and with a few swift moves, locked Bremner inside the room. Kyle realized this meant Coke was coming after him and decided to confront him head-on. Old grudges and new rage boiling over, Kyle pulled a knife from his boot and drove it straight into Coke's chicken throat. Just like that, the major antagonist from last season was abruptly eliminated and sent to meet Satan. But murder doesn't go unpunished. Kyle was quickly apprehended. During questioning, it was revealed that Coke had sent countless subordinates to their deaths in search of the primordial heart node. Kyle's own brother had been one of the casualties. Rose, though secretly impressed by Kyle's boldness, had no authority to pardon him. Eventually, she managed to track down the imprisoned communications officer and finally reached Morgan. But Morgan's response was chillingly concise. She was about to send a helicopter to retrieve Coke's body. As for Kyle's crime, she chose not to pursue charges. In the lawless Arctic, the company had full discretion over crisis management. Involving the police would only create unnecessary complications. And so, just like that, Kyle was inexplicably set free. Realizing how precarious his position was, Kyle immediately sought out Rose, offering to hand over the mission logs, but only on the condition that they not fall into the hands of corporate leadership. He had barely finished his sentence when Bremner stormed in, gun in hand. Rose could hardly believe it, saying his boss Coke is dead, and so what he still wants the hard drive for. Bremner didn't answer. Instead, his mind flashed back to a recent phone call with York, son of a company board member, and the real financier behind Coke's operations. York had ordered Bremner to secure the primordial heart node at all costs, promising a massive reward and a fast track to promotion if he succeeded. At the time, Bremner was skeptical, asking how York could guarantee any of that since he didn't hold any real power in the company. York had simply laughed, telling him to just wait for the company announcement. Sure enough, not long after the call ended, York arrived at the company's Arctic outpost, supposedly to inspect the refugee situation. In truth, he came to deliver a corporate coup. Morgan was to be removed from her post as the company's CEO, and York would take over. The official reason was that the Arctic program had suffered too many setbacks under Morgan's leadership. Divers dead, critical missions failed, and now even a high-ranking official like Coke had been killed. The board needed someone to take the fall. Morgan was stunned. She had been instrumental in the company's rise, but York didn't care. As he left, he issued a final threat. If Morgan dared expose the company's misdeeds, she'd be ruined, blacklisted from the entire industry. Watching York walk away, all Morgan could feel was utter despair. Not far away, Dr. Kate stood frozen with dread. She had a pass, but after searching the entire camp, she still couldn't find her wife. The only place left unchecked was the mortuary tent. Her heart sank. As much as she feared what she might find inside, she knew she had to be sure. Steeling herself, she stepped into the tent and began unzipping the body bags one by one, each movement heavier than the last. Outside, Hutton waited silently, the cold air mixing with the dawn light as it slowly crept over the horizon. Finally, Kate emerged, her face dark and unreadable. She hadn't found her wife's body. Hutton offered a few comforting words. Surely this was good news, but Kate didn't see it that way. The thought that she might never even find her wife's remains was its own kind of torment. Trying to push the dread from her mind, Dr. Kate entered the medical tent and spotted a nurse trembling beside a cot. The young woman was clearly overwhelmed, likely her first time facing this many wounded. With her background in medicine, Kate instinctively helped calm her down. But inside, her own heart remained in turmoil. Determined to make herself useful, Kate chose to stay and join the medical team, doing whatever she could to help the injured recover. Hutton, on the other hand, burned with anger. If he couldn't help the victims directly, then he'd make sure the ones responsible were held accountable. Just as he stepped out of the tent, he ran into a familiar face, the widow of one of the men who died on the drilling platform. Her eyes were hollow, her face etched with grief. As she turned to leave, she whispered she didn't care about compensation. She just wants justice. Her words struck a chord in Hutton, hardening his resolve to expose the oil company's crimes. Back at the Arctic base, Magnus and the others had only just returned when they were hit with shocking news. Rose and Kyle had been taken hostage by Bremner. Magnus barely had time to sip a cup of hot water before rallying a team for a rescue mission. But Kyle wasn't the type to sit back and wait. Claiming the hard drive was hidden in the upstairs lab, he led Bremner and Rose up the stairwell. Then, at the turn of the corridor, Rose grabbed a fire extinguisher and knocked Bremner to the floor, and she and Kyle bolted. They soon reunited with Magnus's team. Kyle, finally able to breathe again, led them to a lower-level maintenance room and retrieved the hidden hard drive. Handing it to Rose, he urged her to make sure its contents never again led to disaster. But Magnus couldn't relax yet. One question lingered. Where had Bremner gone? They got their answer soon enough. As they passed the diving hall, the technician burst out, clearly shaken. Right behind him was a crazed Bremner. Rose, alarmed, pulled out the hard drive, hoping to end things peacefully. Bremner, shocked by his luck, reached for it. But at that moment, Fulmer lunged at him. In the scuffle, a shot rang out. Rose was hit. Chaos erupted. Everyone rushed to her side, but it was too late. With a final breath, Rose slipped away. Bremner snatched the hard drive and fled the scene. Fulmer was left in stunned silence. Could it really be the end of Rose? But then, something incredible happened. As her teammate looked on in horror, the wound on Rose's body began to glow with a brilliant blue light. Her pupils twitched violently, as if she were caught in a vivid dream. Somehow, miraculously, Rose came back to life. The others stared in disbelief. Fulmer was the first to understand. It was the healing ability of the primordial microorganisms. Before long, Rose was not only alive, but fully healed, bursting with energy. She admitted then that she'd been infected by the primordial life form. While on the brink of death, she received a vision, an important truth. The 4 previous mass extinctions on Earth had not been caused by the primordial life form. Quite the opposite. They had survived those apocalypses and helped life begin anew. Rose was furious. Humanity was barreling toward a new extinction and destroying the planet's only built-in survival system in the process. She was determined to stop the oil company's slaughter, no matter the cost. What she didn't know was that Bremner had already sent the coordinates of the primordial heart to the new CEO, York. But York had no intention of paying Bremner the promised reward. Instead, he assigned him one more task. Meanwhile, the senior researcher had returned to the lab, continuing his research into the mysterious signal. He placed a small piece of contaminated ice crystal into a culture chamber, where 10 groups of microorganisms instantly took up defensive postures. The receiver picked up a faint audio signal. Its wave pattern was nearly identical to the one from the earlier recording. At that moment, the senior researcher had a revelation. The original recording had been a distress call from the primordial microorganisms. No wonder the signal had saved them during the ice field attack. It was a cry for help from the very creatures humanity was trying to destroy. Back at the survivors' camp, Hutton and Kate finally managed to track down a journalist, hoping to expose the oil company's crimes. But the reporter could only shake his head, saying they didn't have any solid evidence. Words alone wouldn't convince the public, especially when just days ago, Dr. Kate was on camera praising the company's rescue efforts. Just as they were running out of options, a doctor approached Kate with urgent news. A patient had just been admitted to the camp hospital, and her appearance matched the description of Kate's wife. Kate rushed over in a panic. The woman was severely injured, but the moment Kate laid eyes on her, she knew it was her. Hutton watched the emotional reunion, and for the first time in days, felt the weight lift from his chest. Now, with no lingering attachments, he strode straight into Morgan's office. He had come to hold her accountable, but to his surprise, she was no longer CEO of the company. Still, Morgan wasn't in a forgiving mood either. She warned him that taking her down won't destroy a company like this. Hutton chuckled, asking her what she was gonna do. Arrest all the wounded and grieving families outside? That shut her smelly mouth up. Near midnight, almost as if drawn by something she couldn't explain, Morgan wandered into the medical tent. She no longer carried herself like a corporate leader. Instead, she observed the injured from the perspective of an ordinary person. A strange heaviness settled over her heart. 2 hours later, she made some calls, using her remaining contacts to deliver a large batch of desperately needed medical supplies. It was a small gesture, her way of trying to make up for past mistakes. Dr. Kate was still reeling from the emotional whirlwind when Hutton suddenly reappeared. From the look on their faces, it was clear they were back on the same page. Together, they planned to return to the Arctic Exploration Station to finish what they had started. Before they left, Morgan discreetly slipped a USB drive into Kate's hand, telling her to watch what's on it and she will know what to do. Kate hadn't expected such a gift. Without hesitation, she passed the drive to the journalist. It wasn't exactly evidence, but it was something even better, a powerful personal testimony. Before long, TV stations across the country interrupted programming to air a breaking news bulletin. Appearing on screen as the former CEO, Morgan made a shocking statement. The massive tsunami had been triggered by the oil company's attempt to attack the primordial life form and was followed by an elaborate cover-up using illegal tactics. Back in the Arctic Circle, Rose and the others caught the broadcast through the company's internal network. They were stunned, but deeply impressed. Just then, a helicopter arrived at the exploration platform. To everyone's surprise, Hutton and Morgan had returned together. Morgan immediately sought out Rose and Magnus to offer a sincere apology for her earlier deception. She admitted she never expected the primordial life form to be so powerful. At the time, she was acting from the company's perspective. A tiny microbial species didn't seem worth jeopardizing a corporate transformation strategy. Rose was still cold, asking if she came looking for forgiveness. Morgan suddenly grew intense, saying, "This fight isn't over. Even with her statement, the company won't stop. They have no idea how far the company is willing to go." Almost as if on cue, the computer screen lit up with a live news broadcast. York, the new CEO, was giving a press conference. He flatly denied Morgan's claims, calling them fabricated lies meant to dodge responsibility. According to him, internal evidence pointed to an unapproved experimental project led by Morgan herself as the real cause of the tsunami. He said the board had dismissed her and was preparing to sue her for defamation. His sharp, decisive remarks stirred public opinion once again. But Morgan had expected this. She knew her confession alone wouldn't take down the company. Right now, the priority was stopping the oil company's next move, a strike on the primordial heart. The location had already been exposed. From the base, it was now possible to remotely deploy a drone to poison it. Magnus quickly thought of one person, Bremner, who had vanished without a trace. Armed personnel scoured the facility, but there was no sign of him. Rose saw things clearly. Killing Bremner wouldn't stop the company's plan. The most effective solution was to go to the primordial heart in person and broadcast its existence to the world via camera. Even if they couldn't bring the oil company to justice, they could at least stop them from destroying it. Just then, the technician delivered a stroke of genius. He had cracked the company's network firewall and could now transmit data externally at any time. Kyle, who had previously reviewed the hard drive, vaguely remembered the location of the primordial heart. The problem was, the base's only submersible had been damaged. Reaching the site was now the most difficult obstacle. Magnus's eyes sharpened with determination. The plan was crazy, but it was their only shot. He was confident he could get the vehicle operational in time. His ace in the hole was the veteran mechanic, Hutton. With years of experience repairing exploration equipment on the platform, Hutton got to work. Under his command, a functioning submersible was soon rolled out. The only drawback? It was missing an umbilical cable, meaning it had to run on backup batteries. It could stay submerged for only 2 hours max. Rose did the math. A one-way trip to the heart would take about an hour. This mission would likely be one-way only. Still, without hesitation, she climbed into the sub. To everyone's surprise, her boyfriend Fulmer insisted on joining her. He'd already lost Rose once. He wasn't about to let her disappear alone again. Rose said nothing, burying her emotions deep as she powered up the submersible. Back in the control room, Magnus wasn't sitting still either. Morgan had mentioned Bremner might be controlling the old drone to release poison. Determined to stop him, Magnus combed through the platform, and sure enough, spotted Bremner sneaking around the warehouse. But he was a step too late. The drone carrying the toxin had already been launched. Furious, Magnus unleashed a stream of curses. Bremner reached for a weapon, but before he could grab it, he was gunned down. Magnus stared helplessly at the nearly completed progress bar on the computer screen. Underwater, Rose and Fulmer saw the toxic drone streak past overhead, too fast to intercept, but at least it confirmed they were headed in the right direction. When they finally reached their destination, they were met with silence. A thick greenish fog was slowly spreading. With power already half drained, Rose didn't hesitate. She shut off the transponder, donned her dive suit, and stepped out of the sub. Magnus, watching from the command room, was on the verge of panic. After thinking it over, he made a bold call: divert all remaining energy to move the base directly above the sub's position. He planned to repeat the emergency rescue maneuver they'd used last time, retrieving the sub with a recovery pod. Meanwhile, Rose had reached what looked like a lifeless ruin. She picked up a vine-like strand, only for it to disintegrate into powder. Was this all that was left of the primordial life form? Her heart sank. She was afraid that she arrived too late again. She scoured the ruins until she noticed a faint glimmer deep in a crevice. Her heart leapt. If the primordial being had once healed a human like her, maybe it still could. She watched in awe as a stream of silvery light surged outward, rushing through the withered vines like water through a dry creek bed. Moments later, a massive tree-like form began to rise from the seabed. Rose's eyes widened in disbelief. The primordial life form, thought to be destroyed, was regenerating at an astonishing pace. Instinctively, she activated her helmet camera to record the miracle. Then the impossible happened again. More and more of these massive trees appeared, revealing their towering silhouettes in the deep. What Rose had first seen was only a small branch of the true primordial network. Not just Rose and Fulmer, but everyone on the platform above watched in stunned silence as glowing outlines stretched across the ocean floor, images that were simultaneously broadcast around the world. Back at headquarters, the oil company's acting CEO received the news. The Arctic development license had been revoked, and company executives were now under investigation. But for Rose and Fulmer, this triumph came with a cost. They were stranded in the deep sea with no way back. The sub's power reserves were too low to return. They shut down all non-essential systems, leaving only life support running. Just when all hope seemed lost, a blinding light filled the cockpit. The recovery pod from the base had arrived. Against all odds, they had been saved. What no one knew was that the location of their platform had quietly become a target of interest for a powerful military force. And that's the end of Season 2. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.